things have changed. I'm no longer the same person as I was before. I haven't changed, but the world is changing around me. And thus begins the slippery slope of persecution of Jews, in particular, the persecution of Irving Roth.
Irving, when I was in 6th grade, I read a book that really challenged me. And it challenged me to really look at that statement, those who don't understand their history are doomed to repeat it. That book was Night by Elie Wiesel, and got a chance to actually interview him. You're nodding your head, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Take us back to that time period where, what was the first indication you had that Jews, people were looking at them differently in Europe?
I grew up in Czechoslovakia, which was a democracy at the time that I was born, and Germany occupied part of Czechoslovakia in September of '38 and promised, of course, they have no intentions to take anything else. But in the spring of 1939, they totally dismembered Czechoslovakia, meaning they took over what is now the Czech Republic, totally controlled it. And where I lived became a new country called Slovakia, and the election elected the Nazi Party as being the ruling party of the country. But the first real fear that I had as a child, my father was sitting at the radio listening to it. His face was not the same color. He was pale. There seemed to be fear in his eyes. And as a 9-year-old, I, very sensitive to how parents react to things. And that's when I found out that the night before, 1,000 synagogues were set on fire in Germany.
You were looking at things all around you, even things like a sign in a park that said, Jews and dogs forbidden to enter. You slowly started losing friends. In fact, a girlfriend's father said Jews were evil.
You as a Jew are responsible for every single thing that goes wrong in the world. Thus begins the transformation of society on an individual basis.
Principal stood at the school gate and refused to let all the Jewish kids in.
In the whole country, on that day, every Jewish student gets thrown out.
It's one thing to feel like you're hated. It's another thing to know what was about to happen was just basically state-sponsored mass murder. So they started rounding up a lot of Jews through the night. Your friends and things started disappearing. When did they come get you and your brother?
So here I am, almost 13 years old. In the middle of the night, on a Friday night, there's a knock on every Jewish home. Well, there were about 2,000 Jews living in my city. It was a small city of about 6,500. 90% of them were picked up that night and marched into the synagogue, which of course was a small place, but at this point it had 1,800 human beings there. We knew they were going to be deported. We only heard rumors that things are happening. Over 500,000 Jews in the Soviet Union were murdered by firing squads. We heard that, but we didn't believe it.
By Sunday afternoon, they marched out to the train station, into cattle cars, and they're gone.
And the fact that the Jews from my town will be taken to places like Auschwitz was totally unbelievable.
Guards are all around screaming and yelling. And in the distance, you see flames coming out of chimneys against the black sky.
You were tattooed. You worked in the fields and the swamps.
And oftentimes there'd be a doctor in uniform and determine if you should continue to live.
Even at that time, were you thinking in your head, someone from the outside world has to come get us. Someone has to know what's happening. Someone has to stop this.
Theoretically, that was the case because by June of 1944, the invasion of Normandy took place. I happened to be in Auschwitz at the time with my brother. We hear about it through the grapevine in the camp itself. And now the war's going to come to an end, and America and England and France and Russia are going to take over the world and get rid of all these bad Nazis. Unfortunately, it didn't happen quite so fast because it continued, the war continued. You're talking 1945. The war will be over in May. The Russian army is 50 miles or so from Auschwitz. 1.2 million people were brought to Auschwitz. But the remaining that were still alive was only 60,000. But they marched us out on a death march. And for 3 days and 3 nights, you're marching.
Hundreds and thousands of people were shot on the way because the guards marched with us for 2 hours, and for 4 hours they would ride. We marched continuously. So people would stop, slow down, and the reason it's called a death march is because if you didn't continue marching at the pace they set, you were dead. And finally, after 3 days, we were put into open cars in the middle of the winter, and finally we arrived in a new place called Buchenwald.
And there things were even worse because it was originally built in 1937 for 5,000 prisoners. By the time I arrived there are 60,000 people. And the facilities are more or less the same. And the amount of total food for the whole camp hasn't changed much. So at this point, if you get a boiled potato every second day, you're a very lucky person.
You were separated from your brother, who you never got to see again.
Because up to that point, I always had someone to lean on, someone to speak to, would give me hope, would encourage me. What am I to do alone? I continued talking to him, though he wasn't there. He wasn't evil, my brother. Gentle, kind, sweet human. He committed no crime.
So here I am, 15 and a half years old, in Buchenwald. The war's coming to an end. We know that because there's bombing taking place almost on a daily basis. But on the beginning of April, they begin death marches again. I am down to about 80 pounds. I'm skin and bone, a skeleton shuffling